Hello, back again with another review. I'm on a roll. Another shot from Mike. So Mike sent in this Arcane challenge shot from the Agora Anim challenge. And Mike says, would love feedback on the body mechanics. It's animated to camera, so no other angles or anything. Cool, so let's take a look. Let's just turn on sound as well. It's pretty cool. Nice. Cool, so as with the previous video, I've already done a few notes, so let's just get right into it and have a look. I guess first of all, I think it's pretty cool. You're definitely hitting some nice poses in this, and it's certainly very ambitious. It's very long. It's very There's just tons going on. So I can't go into detail on every single thing that is maybe not 100% perfect, but I hopefully will give a note on one thing, and then that will apply to a lot of the moments in the shot. So it's not like this is an exhausted list of notes, and they never really are because I can't spend 2 hours or however long. Well, they would take 2 hours to pick everything out, but I have to manage my time and only spend. I'm not just going to repeat myself like I'm doing now. Just repeat myself. Not just going to repeat myself, giving the same notes for different parts. So yeah, they kind of apply to all different parts of the shot. But let's jump into it. Just going to turn off ghosting. So yeah, I noticed when I was frame by framing that if I just frame by frame, there's a couple of frames which are on twos. See here from 18 to 19, it's just stuck on that frame. So I'm not sure if that's like a rendering issue or the way this has maybe been encoded or exported from your editing software. But for camera moves, I'd always make sure things are on ones because I definitely felt that jitter when we went up there. And then if you're animating a character on twos, I think it's nice to still have the background on ones. That's kind of what they do in Spider-Verse or Puss in Boots or anything like that. And it works pretty nicely. So rather than keeping the camera on and the background essentially on twos, I'd keep that on ones. And if you're going to animate on twos with a dynamic camera, maybe have the character on twos. Kind of like you do here, some fun stuff. But if I just turn off my tracing paper there, you can kind of see how the background is just remaining on ones. So I would just have that continue to move. And then probably parent her to the camera so that she is staying in exactly the same space on twos, but then as the camera moves, the background moves. So I wanted to look at the punch here. So if I just turn off my drawings, I feel like the spacing of that punch just needs to be managed a little more. It kind of feels like, if I track this, pointer. If I track the fist, it's kind of jumping around on screen. So then when we cut, we go from here on screen to way back here, and it's all popping around quite a lot. As much as you can manage that to make the spacing not pop, and I've drawn an example of maybe what you could do here. I think it would be a lot clearer. So kind of see there with those red drawings. If I just turn on held drawings, you can kind of see how we're not popping screen left or screen right between those. And they're always kind of progressing over this way and, progressively getting a little smaller. I didn't want to spend tons of time working this out, and I didn't want to mention cameras in this because you said to specifically focus on the body mechanics. But I think it's a cut here and she's over here, and then we kind of like shoot back with the camera. It just makes our eye have to pop over there. So as much as you could keep that in the same space and just simplify the spacing, it would help a lot. So you can kind of see by putting, she would be over here as well doing what she's doing. But by kind of putting it in that same space when we cut, just helps to guide the eye and things are just a bit clearer, but maintaining kind of what you already have. And then I felt like this is a note for a few things through the shot. So it feels like you kind of have this big hold, and then we kind of quite linearly get out of that. So I would kind of have that big hold, and then I like to treat really stylized things like this as if you're just going from like pose to another pose on a storyboard. So the stuff in between those poses, for example, say you have a pose here which is giving you this information of like a contact. You then want to get to, this end pose where she's thrown that punch and we're just seeing like the aftermath of that as quickly as possible. So that means that any transition from this frame to this frame, which is, it's 5 frames. So any transition through there is just going to take away impact and it's going to take away clarity from your shot. So as much as you can, kind of like get her in that pose and then have her quickly sort of straight from that into the next pose, and then have your spacing hold in the end pose rather than having that linearly go from pose to pose. Really punch up your spacing. And if you went from, say, this pose straight into this pose, 98, and then it was just almost going from frame 100 here to 101 over 5 frames instead of over 1 frame there, I think it would just have a lot more impact and your moving holds would feel a bit nicer. So that's kind of an overarching theme through this review. It's going to be spacing and just making sure that you're managing that spacing, because you're hitting nice poses. Like this is a pretty nice pose. I mean, there's perhaps some flow that we could change through a little bit, but generally it's a nice pose. It tells the story. So it's just then working on that spacing and making sure that we're holding the poses for the amount of time that's going to be like have the most impact and is the most clear for those poses. So this is another example that I thought was worth drawing. So you kind of have nice things going on in here. You have like a nice smear. This is merely just to like get that knee in an arc, this drawing. But it's also helpful to kind of have that demonstrate what I'm going to be talking about, which is, first of all, arc, but also spacing. So we kind of go from this pose and there's not a ton of arc to that spacing. So we're a bit stuck in this leg back pose for a bit too long. And then as we come through, there's not much of like a follow through, and we're also holding, it feels like in almost like a middle position. So you're not feeling the massive impact of that kick that she's done. So you kind of want to hold that right at the point where it tells the story the most, right? So if we do this, then, so if we hold in this pose, for example, with the leg up here, that kind of tells you that she's gone from here, with this kick back here, and we've done all of this information in the middle. So we're telling the story of that arc. We're telling the story of how that leg has gone from there to there, and it's almost like more extreme of a kick than just having it hold down here, because that just tells us that she's gone from like here to here versus all of this motion in just one frame. which is obviously a greater range of motion. So then I've also drawn in here I guess I drew this because I felt like the smear wasn't quite giving you a sense of the arc that is taken, because we're going from here to here. We're not really seeing what happened in the middle. So I always think of a smear as saying what has happened and also what is going to happen, but what happens in the middle, more importantly. So if you want to cover the distance from here to here, I feel like having a smear which is a bit more, like this to sell that arc is going to, demonstrate things a bit more. And if she's doing this sweeping kick, it does feel like it would be that arc. So then here I've drawn, not sure what this frame is, let me delete that. I've kind of drawn an example of that moving hold. So you can see how the progression is working. If I just turn on some ghosts, you can see how the progression is kind of like, one sec. So if you look at the spacing between these, we go from this to here, all the way to here, and then we're just doing this tiny, tiny bit of spacing at the end. So that's what I'm talking about, of like really getting into that end pose, but then still progressing it and making sure that you're moving that hold and you're not just like sticking in space. And then I feel like maybe it's clearer just to explain what I'm talking about for this next bit by doing drawings. So I'll play it over the top, and hopefully that just kind of makes sense of what I'm trying to get at here. And the reason we do this is to really, like I said, treat it like it's a storyboard, to really sell those poses and those beats. So if we look at these, we're essentially, for all of these extra frames that we're maybe holding that pose and coming out of it, and actually you're holding it for longer than I'm suggesting. So I think with this one, you actually want to be coming out of it sooner, because we want to link up the motion into the next thing. But I've drawn a breakdown here, which is kind of like, it's a bit of a mess, but it's essentially like having things go from that big wide pose to an up, but via like a big compression in the middle, and really like trying to sell the spin that she's doing. So I feel like if we look at the arc of what she's going to be doing, she's kind of like doing this big kick and then coming up like that. So by dropping this, leading down with this hill, that kind of allows us to ease into this compression and then this up. And then instead of spending all of this time kind of getting up there, we get up there a lot sooner with that leg. So then we're holding that storytelling pose up there of the leg, anticipating that kick down for a lot longer. So I've got it up there, how many frames? 5 frames earlier than in your animation. And I've also lowered that stick so that we get like a nice clear silhouette of the foot up there, and we can just tell what's going on a bit more. And then through here, things feel like they could be snapped up a little more. So this, I guess, is just like a smear. And then we're just in the pose, which is kind of exactly what you have. But then, like I said in the previous review that we did, she's kind of settling in that pose, and then the thing that's not moving is the thing that's giving you the impact, and the rest of it is kind of all just, settling out of that motion and getting that residual motion from that big kick that happens, which is what's kind of going on with the arms there. So just play that through again. Hopefully that makes sense, how that's just a bit clearer, and tightening up your spacing in the like most extreme poses is just going to help to make things read a bit clearer. And then here, I just wanted to, again, touch on spacing again. So I'm looking at what her head is doing. And it kind of feels like we don't ease out of that pose. We just get into an anticipation, and then we very quickly have this really harsh spacing here, and then we do all of the spacing through those 2 frames. But then we're actually kind of held in this area. I'm not sure if it's maybe just a motion blur issue, but you know, we kind of get all the way to here, and then over 3 frames it's doing this spacing. Whereas you could use that spacing to, as I've drawn here, I again turn on some ghosts and kind of see a bit more what's happening. But she's kind of using that spacing to tell the story of the antic, which is happening here. So we're holding here for a lot longer. And then using those frames that we have to really push that spacing, which will then help the hook up a bit more. Because like I said, there's some nice poses in here. If we look at this, this is, you know, you're getting some nice stretch in here, and that's going to be really nice. But there's some spacing issues in here, and there's some arc issues in here. So it's like arcs and spacing is kind of the overall theme of what's going on here. So you can see that she kind of like jumps up quite nicely, and the spacing even of this is working pretty well. But then she just kind of sticks down if you look at the arc of this. And then we go back up. And there's just not that consistent of an arc to it, versus if we maybe had her go here, and then let me turn off laser pointer. So I mean, I'm drawing this arc, but realistically, because she's doing all of this big spacing in this, she would actually probably want to be a bit further along and then do much more of her translate X movement. And then at the kind of end of her arc, she would want to probably be, you know, hitting something which is a bit more in this kind of realm. Again, it's nice posing. I just think we need to think a little more about the spacing and the arcs. So made a bit of a mess of this one, but let's turn on my ghosts. So you can kind of see how that arc is going to be a lot nicer than the kind of up, down, and straight across that we have going right now. And then doing this hold here is not quite working for me. I feel like we do, you know, if we look at the spacing, we're kind of like getting up here, and then we're doing a lot of spacing over here, and then we're again, sorry, thinking about like the whole scene in this box basically, but you know, and then we're getting over here, and then almost having like a big jump in spacing again. You can get that so the spacing is, you know, just a bit more progressive, and you know, maybe comes from where we had that hold before and strikes here, things will just feel a bit more impactful. And I'm all for having these holds when we do. I would just make sure they have a moving hold to them. So with this red leg that I've drawn here, I was thinking about how we can again show the arc of what's happened. So it's kind of kicked around and then got a nice hold at the end. You see some spacing. I've drawn the head there, like blasting off. And then I think here, where she's kind of like going towards the dummy, we're kind of gaining momentum from nowhere. So it'd be cool just to kind of keep the momentum of what happens with that going into that, so she has a physicality about her. I mean, even if you do have some really, funky spacing in there, to the arc itself, to have her kind of go down and then up as we do is just a little bit too unnatural. So I'd probably have her, coming down out of that, boom, into, going across. If I was doing something a little more pushed. But honestly, something like this, it feels like you just want kind of realistic ballistics to those arcs. And just like realistic weight and body mechanics in there. Now, this is all, I feel like these poses, it's possible to make them work if you got rid of some of those holds and some of that janky spacing, because in holding this moment here and then having a kind of shoot over to here, it makes things a bit unbelievable. But if you kind of reach this pose a lot earlier and then compressed into that pose over these frames, maybe, so that we maybe, get to here, then it's a bit more believable that she can then kind of push off and do what you have going on. But I think the holds and the spacing of that movement is just maybe making things a bit problematic, and it's almost like adding in issues to the body mechanics that aren't exactly there, because the posing is nice generally. But it's obviously difficult to give notes on spacing as well as the posing if we're just focusing on, I mean, I should be, but what I'm saying is I want to focus on the spacing, because I think that's like the main culprit here, the spacing and the arcs versus what's going on with the posing. So I don't want to say, oh, don't have a kind of come back and do this anticipation on this dummy. I think that's quite nice. It just needs to be worked into kind of a formula of spacing that works quite nicely. So if you have something over here, start over here, and we get progressive over to that, and then we can kind of then ease in to that anticipation, which then sends her back over here. It should just be gone. Sorry, there's a lot of drawing on drawing here. Hopefully it's all clear. And then here, I was just looking at kind of the up-down This is not so much a spacing thing, but it is an arc thing. So I don't feel a ton of up and down when she's running in her hips. And it's not about having her head doing a lot of up and down, because you can kind of counter that with a lot of like lean when she's running. But I do think you need to feel for something super powerful like this, and especially where she's quite low down, I feel like you would need a big kind of pop up so that her hips end up there. And then we kind of like jump out of that into a run. So just adding more up and down to this run and jump. And then here she just feels a bit stuck. If you had... So if we look at this, I feel like we should just progress up through here. And then as we start to ease down, and kind of see how that would just give you some nice moving hold action through that. Then here, I think, you know, what you're doing is pretty good. Just watching that spacing, going into this. And I also feel like you probably, because her chest is kind of like that, as you come down, just overlap that chest so it goes back. You get a nice straight pose, like a big stretch pose before the squash. And then this line is her hips, this is her chest, and this is her head. Those are obviously her arms. Just kind of looking at how you could maybe get some more mechanics in there and more squash and stretch before that big kind of punch. So just having things go from stretch to squash to then the final pose. Because she kind of sticks in that pose with her hips. It'd just be cool to get some more up down. And then it would also be nice to maybe get a bit of recoil from that punch. So yeah, hopefully that is helpful to you. Just focus on that spacing, and the posing is generally pretty nice. Just getting a bit more squash and stretch through there, and taking a look at your arcs and making sure they're all nice and ballistic and follow parabolic arcs and all of those nice scientific physicsy terms. But yeah, thanks a lot again for purchasing a review, Mike. And if you guys are interested in one, what are you waiting for? Go over to keyframecoach.com and get yourself a review. Anyway, catch you in the next one. Thanks a lot, guys.